This video library of World War II, we will focus primarily on the conclusion of that conflict in Europe and in Japan. We also will tour the home front and attend an historic trial. The home front tour is a kaleidoscopic view of what life was like during the war, not over there, but over here. We'll see how Americans responded in those challenging, chaotic days from Pearl Harbor to VJ Day. We'll recount the events of the final months of the war, first as Allied forces swept across the continent, culminating in that delirious day in May 1945 with victory in Europe. And then we'll be there as Japan surrenders to General Douglas MacArthur aboard the battleship Missouri on September 2nd, 1945. We'll recall the events that set the stage for that scene. After the war, a trial took place in Nuremberg, Germany, that some called the trial of the century. In the docket, the top leaders of the Nazi Party will be in that courtroom. We begin with a look at what Americans did over here to help end the war over there. This was the home front.
December 7th, 1941. The Second World War bursts upon America with the bursts of Japanese bombs on Pearl Harbor. It has finally happened. What the nation has heard and read about Poland and France and Britain, it now sees before it. With the wounded, the war comes home to America. Recruiting centers are jammed as Congress declares war on the Axis powers. Some who come are raring to fight. Others simply accept the inevitable. Every draftee must go on the treadmill to induction, starting with the greetings from the president to report for examination, then the probing and prodding, the testing and the tapping.
She will serve them honestly and faithfully against all their enemies, whomsoever, and that you will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over you according to the rules and articles of war. So help you God. I do.
And 12 million Americans enter a new world with a new mixed-up alphabet. GI, KP, CO, OD, and SNAFU, snafu. If some of the new sounds are hard to make out, not so the sound of the sirens. What today is an air raid drill may tomorrow be, who knows? The traditional work of women in war becomes again a commonplace. Nurses' aides flock to hospitals, and the Red Cross takes over stores and buildings everywhere to make room for the flood of volunteers. There are new traditions in the making. Step on it, lady. Tin cans are going to war. And rubber and scrap metal, too. Everybody pitches in. Broadway and Hollywood stars hit the road to sell war bonds. Harpo Marx, Greer Garson, James Cagney, Irene Dunn, Hedy Lamarr, a cast of thousands with but one line of dialogue. Any bonds today? And glamour goes to war. The sweater girl, Lana Turner. The pinup girl, Betty Grable, and comedian Carol Lombard, who loses her life while on a bond tour. Everybody is buying bonds and stamps to finance the war. The youngsters get stamps at school, fill up their stamp books, which can be converted into bonds. And almost as valuable are food ration stamps, which every civilian receives. 16 points for a can of peas. Blue stamps for canned goods, red stamps for meat and butter. No stamps, no sale. Shortages are cropping up all over the place, from cigarettes to hairpins, from nylons to shoes. 3 pairs of leather shoes every 2 years is the ration. And those who want more they can buy unrationed wooden-soled shoes. And the men at home are doing without, too. At left, the fabric-saving wartime suit. No collar, no cuffs, no pleats. There's plenty of money around, but less and less to buy. The black market begins to flourish. Those who shun it have to stand in line for what they want. And when they can't get it, be it a big steak or a small apartment, their complaints are met by the standard reply. Don't you know there's a war on? If there's any gasoline at all, a few gallons a week is all that's allowed on an A ration card, just about enough to drive to the gas station and home again. For business and essential services, there are the more liberal B and C cards. But even with gas, there aren't enough tires to go around. Out of the wartime shortages comes the carpool. By 1944, there are 53 million Americans at work, much of it contributing to the war effort. Security is rigidly enforced. Already, too many Axis spies have been bagged by the FBI to question the need for buttoned-up lips. Now the nation is singing about Rosie the Riveter, but Rosie and the others are much too busy to carry a tune. Children's toys reflect the times. With the fathers away and the mothers at work, day nurseries spring up throughout the country. Children are forced to grow up on their own. Keep smiling is the byword, but in this upside-down, wartime world, smiling isn't always easy. Night is the only time for many to get away from war work, to shop, to enjoy themselves, and spend some of the earnings from the long overtime hours. The war produces a fraternity of night people. Hollywood Canteen, where GIs and sailors meet some of the stars who will soon be following them overseas on the biggest vaudeville circuit of them all, the USO Tours. 500,000 performances, 7,500 entertainers. The Andrews Sisters. By the spring of 1944, the great invasion of Europe is expected at any moment. The only tangible links with the loved ones overseas are the letters. The stream of V-mail letters and packages sent to those mysterious, impersonal addresses: Army Post Office, New York; Fleet Post Office, San Francisco. With the help of special volunteers, those who do not know how to write find that they are able to dictate their letters from home.
Well, what would you like me to write for you?
Sam, my son, we are all feeling good.
We all miss him.
Every day, his dog climbed on his bed.
And faith for him.
And we wait to your mother.
It seems that the OWI is waiting cautiously before putting out anything on these German reports. So far, all these reports have been German. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for a special announcement from the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Forces from London, from Colonel R. Ernest Dupuy. Go ahead, London.
This is Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. Under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France.
In the crucial days of 1944, although hearts and minds are with the fighting men, the people at home are still ready to speak out on who should run the country.
President Roosevelt should run for fourth term because he has been such a good president. He has been running our war just dandy. No one at the present time could do as good a job as he has. Let's keep him in there.
No, I think President Roosevelt should not run for a fourth term. I do think, though, that he has made a wonderful leader during these times of extreme duress. However, if the war does continue beyond election time, I think we should not change horses midstream.
FDR wins again, a fourth term. Soon afterwards, he is off to meet with Churchill and Stalin at Yalta. On March 1st, 1945, he reports on the trip. He is tired and ill.
Members of
6 weeks later, Roosevelt is gone, a casualty of the war. Truman becomes president as the wartime leader is laid to rest at his home in Hyde Park, New York. A shocked nation intensifies its war effort. And then in May, the conflict in Europe is won, and all of the bombs and all of the factories and depots are now earmarked for Japan. But behind the scenes, a new bomb, much more powerful than all of these, has been secretly developed. It will end the war. It will alter the destiny of the world.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe.
August 14th, 1945. It's over, and America goes wild. it's over. A war has been won. A peace has been gained. And from over there, the men are coming back over here.
Let's go back now and examine in greater detail just how the Allied victories came about. In Europe, there were a number of surprises and a whirlwind finish, a race to Berlin. This is how it ended. These were the last 6 months of the fighting in Europe.
This is the German V-2 rocket. When fired, it will arc 55 miles above the Earth. It will hit the ground at 2,500 miles an hour. There is no known defense against it. The first 2 weeks of December are spent in repositioning 1,000 of these weapons. None is fired, but the launching sites are ready. This is the situation map of December 15th, 1944. The Allied armies have drawn up to the German border and are awaiting supplies before their attack is continued. The Germans know of a weak spot in the American lines, here in the Ardennes forest. The Germans plan to bulge through the Ardennes and then sweep to Antwerp, the sole port of supply for the Allied northern armies. If Antwerp falls, 4 Allied armies will be cut off. The Germans call this plan Watch on the Rhine. The Americans will call it the Battle of the Bulge. While a low fog shrouds the rear area, the Germans move forward. December 16th, 1944. The V-2s are launched against Antwerp. Buzz bombs, V-1s. 7,000 German guns opened fire against part of the American positions in the Ardennes. The American lines break open. The Germans have achieved complete surprise. In the first 2 days, they advanced 20 miles. The Germans take 7,000 American prisoners from one American division alone. The American dead now number over 2,000. The German drive moves toward Antwerp. Antwerp staggers under the rocket attack. The V weapons are inaccurate. Only 5% of the rockets and bombs land on the port of Antwerp. The rest fall in the business and residential areas of the city. Fog protects the German advance from Allied air power. The Germans move toward the Meuse River. One city which should fall does not. Bastogne. It is an important road junction, and unless it is taken, the German drive will be constricted. Within Bastogne, American cooks, bakers, and paratroopers fight as infantrymen. The Germans send 3 divisions against Bastogne. The city is surrounded, and German armor grinds into the outskirts. Bastogne calls for help. Allied air power is snowbound and fogbound. The few planes that get off the ground cannot find the battlefield. For 7 days, the bulge expands. On December 23rd, the fog lifts, the sun breaks out, and the German army knows that the Allied air forces will soon appear. The planes of the 9th Troop Carrier Command are over Bastogne. troops and supplies come into the bulge by glider. The bulge is reinforced. Under air cover, the British and American ground forces compress the bulge and wipe it out. In February, the Siegfried Line is breached and the Allied armies spill into the flat Rhineland.
Airborne Charlie, request air support road junction 097-860.
The Germans blow their bridges and retreat behind the Rhine for what the Allies feel will be the Germans' last stand. The American advance is so swift that the bridge at Remagen is captured before the Germans can destroy it. The last natural barrier in Germany is breached. To the north, the second wing of the envelopment comes from the air. Eisenhower, Montgomery, and Bradley must make a decision. The British argue that for post-war peace in Europe, the capture of Berlin by the Allies instead of the Russians is a necessity. But the Americans prefer to destroy the German armies still in the field. Thus, the British and Canadian effort continues in the north, and the Americans and French shift toward the center and the south. Nazi Germany disappears piecemeal. April 10th, 1945. To aid the Russian advance on Berlin, 1,200 American bombers are airborne. This is the last strategic bombing of the war. Its targets, the few jet factories still remaining, and the headquarters buildings of the German army. There are 1,000 miles between Moscow and Berlin. The Red Army has covered them all. The Soviets move into the German capital. The Russians take the city block by block, street by street, hole by hole. Flamethrowers arc from apartment to apartment. On April 25th, the 1st United States Army and the 1st Ukrainian Army meet at the River Elbe. One minute after 11, May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe. Allied air power had defeated German air power a year before the Allied armies defeated the German armies. When the German Air Force broke, this is what Germany lost. Germany lost her oil. Her refineries and cracking plants were destroyed from the air. Without oil, Germany lost her air power. Germany lost her submarine manufacture. Without submarines, Germany lost her sea power. Germany lost her transportation net. Without transportation, Germany lost her ground power. Most of all, Germany lost her industrial plants. Without industry, Germany lost the war. On May 9th, 1945, freedom returned to Western Europe. Vengeance to the villains and the collaborators. Those who live through the war shall always carry the scars of war. Now begins the long journey home.
In the time between victory in Europe and the defeat of Japan, the world changed forevermore. There was Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The atomic age had begun. How those events hastened the end of the war is the story of this chapter.
September 2nd, 1945. 11 men representing the defeated Empire of Japan arrive aboard the battleship Missouri to surrender their country. For the Allied powers, General Douglas MacArthur.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. The terms and conditions upon which surrender of the Japanese imperial forces is here to be given and accepted are contained in the instrument of surrender now before you. I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.
For the Japanese government, Mamoru Shigemitsu. For the Japanese military, General Yoshijiro Umetsu.
The Supreme Commander for the Allied powers will now sign on behalf of all the nations at war with Japan. Will General Wainwright and General Percival step forward and accompany me while I sign?
Wainwright, who had surrendered Corregidor in 1942. Percival, who surrendered Singapore in 1942. The night previous, General Umetsu and other members of the Japanese delegation had threatened to commit suicide rather than sign the surrender document. The Emperor's intervention had forced them to stay alive. 20 minutes after it began, it was all over.
These proceedings are closed.
The ceremony had ended. The killing had ended. The war had ended, but in a manner which neither side had expected. June 1945, the last chapter begins. We have won aerial supremacy over the skies of southern Japan. The island of Kyushu, southernmost of the Japanese home islands, is completely vulnerable to land-based fighter attack. This is what aerial supremacy means. Rail traffic in Kyushu is all but stopped. The few industrial plants that have not been bombed are machine gunned and rocketed. Japan is so short of oil that when her fighters are strafed, there is no gasoline to explode. Already restricted by the submarine campaign of the United States Navy and by Air Force minefields, Japanese shipping lays to in harbor anchorage. The Japanese ships cannot move even in interior waters. But it is by night, by incendiary, and by fire that defeat becomes inevitable. The cities of Japan are wooden fire traps, bamboo buildings that burn like paper. The major cities of Japan are put to the magnesium torch. The worst fires of history burn unchecked. Million people are burned out of their homes. 750,000 Japanese are killed or wounded by the air raids. An official of the Ministry of the Interior writes, "The people in general are abandoning the war as the incendiary attacks of the B-29s become more severe. The whole nation is on the edge of panic. There is no defense against the fires. In spite of the assurances of Radio Tokyo, the nation can see there is no defense against the American bombers." As the ruins cool, the nation can see that Japanese heavy industry lies twisted and ruined. The military economy of Japan has come to a halt. In the face of this destruction, the Japanese diplomats secretly ask Russia, Sweden, and Switzerland to arrange peace between Japan and the United States. But fanatic elements of the Japanese military vow they will kill any government official who talks peace. The negotiations move slowly. The military, through its control of the press, keeps the Japanese people ignorant of the conferences that are being held to find a way out with honor. Honor dictates that until the emperor speaks, Japan will continue to resist. The incidence of disease begins to rise. Malnutrition, typhoid, pneumonia sweep over Japan. Until the emperor speaks, Japan will continue to resist. On July 7th, 1945, the Emperor of Japan personally requests that the war be ended as soon as possible. His language is vague, and the military does not choose to interpret it as a command to surrender, but as a command to win the war. As the crisis sharpens, the Japanese army all but seizes the country. The military recruits a home guard for a suicidal defense against the expected invasion. The military fanatics are incapable of surrendering. They're attempting to force the code of Bushido on the country. Bushido is a 16th century concept of annihilation rather than disgrace, of suicide rather than surrender. The military knows it cannot win the war. It hopes that by using suicide as a weapon, it can inflict so many casualties on the Americans that terms favorable to the Japanese will be offered. Suicide as a weapon. The Japanese Air Forces have 5,000 first-line planes in reserve. These and all other planes and pilots are expendable in kamikaze attacks. 1,900 suicide planes have been used to maul the American fleet off Okinawa. As the hysteria grows, more pilots volunteer for suicide duty. Thus, in July of 1945, the Japanese are torn between military fanatics who demand national suicide and an impotent civil government which cannot decide how to arrange surrender. The Americans are also facing a great debate, equally secret. Within the councils of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Navy and Air Force argue that given enough time, the sea blockade and aerial bombardment of Japan will end the war. But the Army feels that an invasion must take place. The Army's opinion prevails. Thus, the Joint Chiefs of Staff draw up and mark top secret Olympic Coronet, the plan to invade Japan. The first stage of the plan, Operation Olympic, November 1st, 1945. The American 6th Army and the 5th Marine Corps will invade Kyushu, the southernmost of the Japanese home islands. The second stage of the plan, Operation Coronet. 4 months later, March 1st, 1946, the American 8th and 10th Armies, landing at a point near the plain of Tokyo, will invade Honshu, the largest of the Japanese home islands. Olympic Coronet involves great risks. We must expect to take heavy casualties. The ratio has been 1 American casualty for every 2 Japanese defenders. Thus far in the Pacific, we have taken 300,000 casualties. As we have come closer to Japan, our casualties have increased. The American Secretary of War estimates that the cost of invading Japan and conquering the home islands may be 1 million American casualties. This is what Olympic Coronet may cost. 1 million American casualties. Olympic Coronet may be the bloodiest battle in American history. Tinian, 1,500 miles southeast of Japan. The island is covered by B-29s. There are over 400 heavy bombers on the island. Day by day, the bombers are armed with high explosive and incendiary bombs. Until the invasion begins, the bombers will continue the aerial offensive. On one corner of the island, a special group of planes, the 509th Bomb Group. The planes of the 509th have been radically changed on the interior. There's nothing externally significant about this bomb group, but it is virtually sealed off from the rest of the Air Force. The 509th is not sent into the mass formations that bomb Japan daily. The group is ordered to fly a few missions to Japan, but never with the rest of the Air Force. The 509th flies only minor missions, and its formations never number over 6 planes. The planes are armed with high explosives. They sometimes carry a single 10,000-pound bomb of peculiar shape. Only one man of the group knows what lies ahead. The 509th suffers no casualties, and its few missions cause only negligible damage. August 6, 1945. The 509th Bomb Group has a major mission. The first atomic bomb is placed in the bomb bay of an American B-29. If the plane crashes on takeoff, there is some danger that the atomic bomb will explode and kill everything on the island of Tinian. Thus, the bomb is put into the bomb bays disassembled. The bomb is extremely heavy. On a previous night, 4 B-29s carrying an almost equal weight have crashed on takeoff. Directly after takeoff, the technician charged with arming the atomic weapon climbs into the bomb bay and begins to reassemble the bomb. Since the plane is to maintain strict radio silence, there will be no way of knowing until the bomb is dropped whether or not the weapon has been fused properly. Hiroshima. Earlier in the morning, there has been one air raid alert, but the all clear has sounded. Bombardier is not to bomb by radar. The city must be visible to the bombardier's eye. The weather over Hiroshima, clear. The bomb run lasts exactly 4 minutes, 8:11 to 8:15, Hiroshima's time. Dead, 80,000. Wounded, 80,000. At first, the Japanese do not know what has hit them. They can see that most wounds come from blast and heat. The Japanese do not understand the symptoms of radiation sickness. One plane has carried a bomb equal to that of more than 2,000 bombers carrying conventional weapons. One plane has carried a bomb equal to 20,000 tons of TNT. After Hiroshima, the Americans will not lose 1 million men in an invasion of Japan. After Hiroshima, Japanese fanaticism will crumble. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Emperor will demand that Japan be surrendered. The war has ended. But what has begun?
When the war in Europe ended, the four victorious Allied powers made an historic announcement. The top leaders of Nazi Germany would be tried by an international tribunal for their part in that war. The trial would take place in Nuremberg, Germany.
On Nuremberg's Palace of Justice converged the trial's massive cast of characters: judges, lawyers, interpreters, translators, and, in the adjoining prison block, well guarded, the principals themselves. Among the missing, dead by their own hands, Himmler, Goebbels, and of course, Adolf Hitler. A 100,000 captured German documents, many bearing the defendant's own self-incriminating signatures, are screened for evidence. On these, the prosecution resolves to rest its case. Reporters from all over the world cover the trial. Coverage in the German press is at first meager. On November 20th, 1945, the drama begins. Along the streets of this same city, which Martin Luther called the eyes and ears of Germany, 1 million hoarsely cheering citizens used to hail the defendants each September at the giant Nazi party rallies. Today, the former gladiators, many of whom haven't met since the final days of the war, break into smiles at the sight of a friendly face. Reunion ceremonies concluded, they take their places in the dock. These are the defendants, the makers of Nazi policy: Goering, Hess, Rosenberg. The salesmen of Nazi policy: von Ribbentrop, von Schirach, von Neurath, von Papen, Streicher, Fritschie. The muscle of Nazi policy: Jodl, Keitel, Dönitz, Raeder, Kaltenbrunner. The administrators of Nazi policy: Frank, Frick, Funk, Schacht, Speer, Sauckel, Seyss-Inquart. The missing Martin Bormann is tried in absentia. The windows of the darkly paneled courtroom are muffled with velvet draperies as if closing out all distractions to pure justice. Observers focus their attention on Goering, vigorous, shrewd, contemptuous, amply filling his first-row seat on the aisle. Several German lawyers in long velvet-collared robes attend each defendant. Many are prominent Nazis, since each defendant is allowed counsel of his choice. The guard removes a lawyer's hand from the rail for fear of transfer of weapons.
Attention! Tribunal!
The French judges, Falco and Defavre, enter first, followed by the Americans, Parker and Biddle, and the Britishers, Lawrence and Burkett. The Russian judges, Nikitchenko and Volchkov, prefer their uniforms to the judicial robes. Each of the four nations provides one member of the court and one alternate. The American delegate, Francis Biddle, ex-Attorney General of the United States, sits next to Lord Justice Lawrence, who presides.
There is laid upon everybody who takes any part in this trial a solemn responsibility to discharge their duties without fear or favor, in accordance with the sacred principles of law and justice. It only remains for me to direct that the indictment shall now be read.
The indictment takes 4 hours to read. Like all the trial proceedings, it is translated simultaneously in English, French, Russian, or German. The defendants are charged with specific acts which range from mass murder to the deliberate flouting of treaties forbidding the waging of aggressive wars. They are further charged with violating long-standing conventions between nations governing the treatment of prisoners of war and civilian populations in occupied territories.
The defendants to plead guilty or not guilty to the charges against them. They will proceed in turn to a point in the dock opposite to the microphone. Hermann Wilhelm Goering.
The Nazis, second only to Hitler in power and influence, now dozens of pounds lighter on a prison diet, still cuts a flamboyant figure in his dove-colored Air Force uniform.
Before ich die Frage des Gerichtshofes
Before I answer the question of the court, whether I plead guilty or not guilty,
I informed the court that defendants were not entitled to make a statement. You must plead guilty or not guilty.
I declare myself not guilty according to the indictment.
Rudolf Hess.
Hitler's first deputy in the Nazi Party.
No.
That will be entered as a plea of not guilty.
Joachim von Ribbentrop, Nazi foreign minister.
I declare myself not guilty according to the indictment.
The others plead the same.
Wilhelm Keitel.
Nicht schuldig.
Not guilty.
Walter Funk.
Nicht als schuldig. Nicht für schuldig. Nicht schuldig. Nicht schuldig.
Again, Goering tries to take over State Center, is firmly rebuffed by Justice Lawrence.
You are not entitled to address the tribunal except through your counsel at the present time.
Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, the chief prosecutor for the United States, prepares to examine Dr. Hjalmar Schacht, Nazi finance minister.
Dr. Schacht, you said in 1938, we have fallen into the hands of criminals. How could I ever have suspected that? I'm sure you would want to help the tribunal by telling us who those criminals were.
Hitler and his comrades.
I'm asking you to name all that you included in that category of criminals at that time. Hitler, you know, is dead.
Defendant Goering. I might also include Himmler and Bormann. As to the other members of that intimate circle, I do not know who they were.
You named 4 men as criminals, 3 of whom are dead and 1 of whom you say admitted.
I might add one more name. I suppose that Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop knew of the plans of Hitler constantly.
Von Ribbentrop displays shock over this repeated violation of the prevailing strategy of Nuremberg defense, to lay all misdeeds at the door of men beyond the reach of the court. The Soviet judges confer as Alfred Jodl, mastermind of the German army, takes the stand to testify about the Nazi invasion of Austria.
Were you told that Hitler said that the German question could only be solved by force?
Nein.
No.
When Hitler heard that Schuschnigg was going to obtain the opinion of the people by plebiscite, he decided to invade at once, did he not?
Yes.
Jodl's conclusion that if a country persisted in talk of plebiscites, putting matters to a vote, then bloodshed was inevitable, through no fault of der Fuhrer. As Soviet prosecutor Rudenko bows to the court, agitation flares in the dock. They should be trying the Russians, the defendants seem to be arguing. Possibly in rebuttal, Rudenko offers in evidence a film of Nazi justice for conquered peoples, much of it captured German footage. At this tense international moment, however, someone blunders in the projection room. The film comes on upside down. The laughter subsides as reel after reel of film compiled by each of the four powers unfolds. Here, the record of confiscation. After the farm animals are shipped off, the human beings are dispatched to labor for the Fuhrer. The scenes revive old memories for defendant Saukel, chief of labor recruitment, who forcibly imported 5 million such workers into Germany, and for Speer, who gratefully used them, as well as concentration camp inmates, in the Nazi production effort. Rosenberg, philosopher of racial hatred and minister for Eastern occupied territories, watches other films showing the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto, along with Frick, Minister of Interior, and Hans Frank, Nazi governor of Poland, who later testifies, 1,000 years will pass and this guilt of Germany will not be erased. Hess becomes sick, shakes off von Ribbentrop's efforts to calm him. His colleagues continue to watch with interest as their old friend Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler is shown reviewing the inmates of a concentration camp with special attention to the weak, the sick, the very old. There are scenes of other useless human encumbrances, namely, the very young. A solution has been arranged for all of these. Warm showers for everyone. The shower rooms neatly converting, with admirable Nazi efficiency, into gas chambers. What had some value, of course, was not destroyed. In the special Nazi interpretation of the law of conservation of matter, nothing was wasted. Human hair, false teeth, a vast fortune in gold fillings which was thriftily stowed away in the vaults of the government Reichsbank. Dr. Walter Funk, head of the Reichsbank, American prosecutor Thomas Dodd has a few questions. What does he know about this?
Gold dentures were in the vaults of your Reichsbank, but you didn't know anything about that strange deposit. You knew nothing about that either.
That is absolutely out of the question. That is absurd.
It is. But the document here shows it. And it also...
That's absurd. That's absurd. That's absurd.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying this, but let's get on with it a little more.
I consider that as absolutely absurd.
All right, that's enough. Are you sure you were in the Reichsbank in these days?
Yes.
I have no other questions.
A busy man naturally can't remember everything, as Ernst Kaltenbrunner, chief of the Gestapo, also demonstrates on the stand.
Did you understand the question, defendant? I asked you about an order to kill all inmates at Mauthausen concentration camp shortly before the end of the war. Who was responsible for that order? Were you?
Nein. No.
The American prosecutor confronts him with a copy of the order signed in his own hand. In the long, document-ridden trial, the testimony of Hermann Goering is the highlight as he spars with the British prosecutor, Sir David Maxwell Fyfe.
Do you still seek to justify and glorify Hitler?
I don't have to justify or to glorify the Führer Adolf Hitler. But I must only declare that I have always been faithful to him.
The Führer must have had full knowledge of what was happening with regard to concentration camps, mustn't he?
I have already stated that the Führer was not aware of the details of that which was happening in the concentration camps, but that which...
I'm not asking about details, I'm asking about the murder of 4 or 5 million people. Are you suggesting that nobody in power in Germany, except Himmler and perhaps Kaltenbrunner, knew about that?
I have no proof.
Will you answer my question? Do you still say that neither Hitler or you knew of the policy to exterminate the Jews?
As far as Hitler is concerned, I have stated that I do not think that he was aware of it. As far as I'm concerned, I knew that in some occurrences there had been such events.
You didn't know to what degree, but you knew that there was a policy that aimed at the extermination of the Jews.
The judges make some last notes as the trial approaches its end. On August 29, 1946, the chief American prosecutor, Supreme Court Justice Robert H. Jackson, comes forward for his final summation.
These men saw no evil, spoke none, and none was uttered in their presence. When we put all of their stories together, this is the ridiculous composite picture of Hitler's government that emerges. It was composed of a number 2 man who knew nothing of the excesses of the Gestapo which he created. A number 3 man who was merely an innocent middleman transmitting Hitler's orders without even reading them, like a postman or a delivery boy. A foreign minister who knew little of foreign affairs and nothing of foreign policy. A security chief who was of the impression that the policing functions of his Gestapo and SD were somewhat on the order of directing traffic. A party philosopher who was interested in historical research and had no idea of the violence which his philosophy was inciting in the 20th century. Now, this may seem like a fantastic exaggeration, but this is what you would actually be obliged to conclude if you were to acquit these defendants. If you were to say of these men that they are not guilty, it would be as true to say that there has been no war that there are no slaves, that there has been no crime.
The judges file out of the courtroom to consider their verdict. It is 9 months and 10 days since the trial began, almost 2/3 of the time having been allotted to the case for the defense. For still another month, the judges, British, American, French, and Russian, continue their deliberations, the lights in their chambers burning into the night as they pore over the massive trial record and prepare to hand down what some observers called perhaps the most far-reaching legal document of all time. At last, on September 30th, 1946, comes the day of judgment. Defendants, lawyers for both sides, translators, interpreters, guards, all those who have been confined together for so many months in this isolated chamber at Nuremberg, lean forward as Lord Justice Lawrence begins to read the 50,000-word verdict. On the following day, the individual judgments and the sentencing.
Defendant Hermann Wilhelm Göring, the International Military Tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. Joachim von Ribbentrop, the tribunal sentences you to death by hanging.
The grim calling of the roll proceeds. Death by hanging. Keitel, Jodl, Rosenberg, Kaltenbrunner, Frank, Frick, Seyss-Inquart, Sauckel, and Streicher. Hess, Funk, and Raeder are sentenced to life imprisonment. Ernitz, von Schirach, Speer, and von Neurath get shorter terms. Fritschie, Schacht, and von Papen all are acquitted and receive their exit visas to the outside world. A few hours before the hanging, Göring commits suicide in his cell. In 50 or 60 years, he has told a jailer, there will be statues of Hermann Göring all over Germany. 7 of the Nazi hierarchy are jailed in Spandau prison, guarded by the 4 powers in turn. The trial at Nuremberg awaits a final judgment, the verdict of history in the 20th century.
As we conclude this video series on World War II, it seems appropriate to consider the verdict of history about this entire period of world conflict. One verdict is simple and simply stated: good prevailed. When faced with tyranny, overwhelming and overpowering as it was, the forces of freedom won out. We look back on World War II as a noble war, America's last conflict with clearly identifiable enemies and clear-cut patriotic goals. Unlike later conflicts like Vietnam, there was an all-out war effort with broad support on the home front. Another legacy of World War II has been the Cold War, the ensuing and pervasive period of enmity and distrust between the Soviet Union and the United States. A remembrance of the horrors of Hitler's anti-Semitism has been a spur to the creation of the State of Israel and the continuing determination of the Jews to never again be victims. There are, of course, others, but perhaps one of the most important legacies of World War II is that while it did not prevent future wars, it may have helped prevent future atomic or nuclear wars. The lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki appear, for now at least, to have prevailed. The danger is that their impact diminishes with time. When people no longer remember the awful, awesome things that took place there, the world indeed will be in mortal jeopardy. In closing this series, the words of the philosopher Santayana seem apt. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. For the CBS Video Library of World War II, I'm Walter Cronkite.